The wheels of Kaitlyn's chair made no sound on the marble floor as she approached the entrance to the Grand Plaza Hotel. Outside, a crowd of photographers waited for tonight's gala attendees. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. 1 year ago, Richard had left her sobbing on a sidewalk, telling her he didn't sign up for a cripple. Tonight, she wore red, the color of blood, of power, of revenge. As the doors opened and the flashbulbs popped, she caught sight of him across the lobby. Her ex-husband froze mid-conversation, champagne flute suspended in air, as realization dawned in his eyes. He didn't know yet that she owned the building he stood in. Before we dive into this story, I'm curious, where are you watching from right now and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments below, and if you enjoy stories of powerful comebacks, hit subscribe to join us. Kaitlyn Sanders had everything a woman could want. At least, that's what people said when they looked at her life from the outside. A gorgeous mansion in the hills, overlooking the city. A closet full of designer clothes. And Richard, handsome, successful Richard, with his winning smile and commanding presence at every social event. "You look stunning tonight," Richard whispered as they entered the Callaway Foundation dinner, his hand pressed firmly against the small of her back, guiding her toward the important people he needed to impress. Kaitlyn smiled and nodded as he introduced her, always as my beautiful wife, but never mentioning her business degree or the investment strategies she'd helped him develop. That was their unspoken arrangement. Richard shone in public, Kaitlyn supported from the shadows. She'd given up her career at a top investment firm when they married, focusing instead on being the perfect corporate wife. "The Henderson account is almost closed," Richard told her later that night as she removed her jewelry. "Once that's done, we'll take that trip to Bali you've been wanting." Kaitlyn felt a twinge in her leg, the third time this week. The pain had started months ago, brief and easy to ignore. Now it lingered. "I should see a doctor about this pain," she said. Richard barely looked up from his phone. "Take some aspirin. It's probably from those ridiculous heels you wore tonight." The next morning, the pain had spread. When she dropped a coffee mug, her fingers suddenly weak and unresponsive. Richard frowned, not at her distress, but at the stain spreading across the Italian marble. "Clean that up before the housekeeper arrives," he said. "We have the Millers coming for dinner tonight." What no one saw, what Kaitlyn herself was only beginning to understand, was how quickly a perfect life could unravel. The whispered conversations Richard had behind closed doors, the way he studied her when she struggled to climb the stairs, the separate bedrooms that had started as a temporary arrangement during her sleepless nights. "You're overreacting," he told her when she mentioned making their home more accessible as her symptoms worsened. "This is just temporary. The Sanders family doesn't do weakness." What Kaitlyn didn't know then, she was becoming inconvenient, and Richard Sanders didn't tolerate inconveniences in his carefully constructed life. The doctor's office felt too cold, the examination table paper crinkling beneath Kaitlyn as she tried to stay still. 3 specialists and countless tests had led to this moment. Dr. Winters reviewed her chart one final time before meeting her eyes. "I'm afraid the results confirm our suspicions, Mrs. Sanders. You have multiple sclerosis." The words hung in the air like smoke. "I see." Kaitlyn gripped the edge of the table as the doctor continued explaining. "Chronic condition, manageable with treatment, unpredictable progression." Words like mobility aids and accessibility considerations floated around her. "I should call my husband," she whispered. Richard arrived 40 minutes later, his face tight with irritation at having left an important meeting. He stood stiffly as Dr. Winters explained the diagnosis again. "So fix it," he said, when the doctor finished. "Mr. Sanders, Mississippi isn't something we can cure. It's a condition we manage. There must be some treatment, some specialist. Money isn't an issue." Kaitlyn reached for his hand. He moved it to check his watch. The drive home passed in silence. Kaitlyn stared out the window, tears sliding down her cheeks. while Richard made calls about rescheduling his interrupted meetings. When they arrived home, he finally spoke directly to her. "We'll get a second opinion. This doctor clearly isn't the best." But 3 more opinions all said the same thing. As weeks passed, Kaitlyn's condition fluctuated, some days better, others worse. On bad days, she needed a cane. Richard scheduled their public appearances around her good days. The first time she used a wheelchair was for the annual Benefactors Ball, an event too important for Richard to attend alone. The evening had started well enough. Richard played the devoted husband, pushing her chair, telling everyone how brave his wife was. But Kaitlyn noticed how he tensed when people asked about her health instead of his business ventures, how his smile tightened when someone approached them with sympathy instead of admiration. The breaking point came when she accidentally knocked over a champagne flute, reaching for her water. The crash silenced nearby conversations. Richard's fingers dug into her shoulder. "For God's sake," he hissed, "can't you control yourself for one night?" The drive home was frigid with tension, or Richard's knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You embarrassed me tonight," he said, as they pulled into traffic. "Do you have any idea who was watching?" The Henderson deal was practically closed, and now James will remember me as the guy with the clumsy wife who caused a scene. "It was an accident," Kaitlyn said, her voice small. "I'm still learning to manage with your condition."
Yes, you've mentioned it.
Repeatedly.
You think I don't have my own problems to deal with?
The market is down. Competitors are circling, and now I have to worry about what spectacle you might create next. Tears burned Kaitlyn's eyes. "I didn't choose this, Richard." "Neither did I." He slammed his hand against the steering wheel. "This isn't what I signed up for." The car jerked suddenly to the curb. Richard put it in park, got out, and walked around to her door. For a moment, Kaitlyn thought he was helping her out, until he opened the trunk instead and threw her wheelchair onto the sidewalk. "Richard, what are you doing?" Terror gripped her as he yanked open her door. "I can't do this anymore." He unfastened her seatbelt roughly. "I need a wife who helps my career, not someone who drags me down." Despite her protests, he pulled her from the car, practically dropping her beside her wheelchair on the empty sidewalk. The cold concrete bit through her expensive dress. "Richard, please. I'll have your things sent to your sister's place. The lawyers will contact you." He tossed her purse beside her. "Don't fight me on the divorce. You won't win." As he drove away, Kaitlyn sat stunned on the darkened street, or the glittering lights of downtown just visible in the distance. Her phone battery was dead. Her legs wouldn't cooperate, and the man who had vowed to love her in sickness and in health had just left her like garbage on the curb. A passing woman stopped, horrified at the sight. "Oh my God, are you okay? Do you need help?" But Kaitlyn couldn't answer. In that moment, something inside her changed, something that would drive everything she did for the next year. The studio apartment looked nothing like the mansion Kaitlyn had called home for the past 5 years. A single bed against one wall, a kitchenette barely big enough to turn around in, a bathroom hastily retrofitted with grab bars after her sister insisted. "You can stay with me as long as you need," her sister Jackie had offered. But Kaitlyn needed space. Space to grieve, space to rage, space to figure out who she was now that she wasn't. "Mrs. Richard Sanders." 3 weeks had passed since the sidewalk incident. 3 weeks of unanswered calls to Richard. 3 weeks of mounting dread as she checked her nearly empty bank account. The knock at her door pulled her from these thoughts. A courier handed her a thick envelope, legal documents from Richard's attorney. Her hands trembled as she read through the divorce papers. The terms were brutal. Richard claimed they had been living separate lives for months before the split, and that her medical needs constituted an undue burden, that most of their assets were linked to his business, and therefore not marital property. Kaitlyn's vision blurred with tears. She'd left her career for him, invested her inheritance in his first major business expansion, hosted countless dinners to charm his investors. In the kitchen drawer, she found an old business card, Martin Wells, Financial Forensics, a contact from her banking days. With shaking fingers, she dialed his number. "I need to understand what's happened to my money," she told him, after explaining her situation. 2 days later, Martin arrived at her apartment with a grim expression and a folder full of bank statements. "I don't know how to tell you this," he said, spreading documents across her small table. "Oh, but these withdrawals began over a year ago. Small enough not to notice individually, but together." He pointed to a highlighted column of figures. "He's been moving your joint assets into private accounts for months." Kaitlyn stared at the evidence of Richard's betrayal before my diagnosis. Martin nodded. "The timing suggests he was planning this exit long before your health issues. Is there anything I can do?" The good news is, he got sloppy toward the end. Some transfers have clear trails, and Martin pulled out another document. "He used your signature on these investment documents after your separation. That's fraud." A small flame of determination kindled inside Kaitlyn. "What do I need to do?" "First, don't sign anything his lawyers send. Second, we need to find you proper legal representation." Kaitlyn wheeled herself to the window, looking out at the city below. "I gave up everything for him, Martin. My career, my independence." "Not everything," Martin said. "You still have your mind." And from what I remember, Kaitlyn Mitchell was one of the sharpest financial analysts I ever worked with. The name struck her. Kaitlyn Mitchell, not Sanders, the person she was before. That night, she couldn't sleep. Instead, she opened her laptop and began searching for news about Richard. His company, Sanders Investment Group, had recently announced a major expansion. Her pictures showed him at various events, already with different women on his arm. One article caught her eye. "Sanders secures historic Beaux-Arts building for new headquarters." Other photos showed Richard standing proudly before the Grand Plaza Hotel, a historic landmark that housed exclusive shops, offices, and a renowned event space. Kaitlyn remembered that building. During their engagement, she'd created the initial analysis on its investment potential. Richard had dismissed it then as too much work for too little return. Another search revealed that the building housed the Grand Ballroom, venue for the annual charity gala Richard had founded, the event that cemented his reputation as a philanthropist while opening doors to the city's elite. As dawn broke, Kaitlyn was still researching. She discovered that Richard had used connections she had introduced him to, had built on strategies she had developed. The realization hit her with stunning clarity. Richard hadn't succeeded despite losing her. He'd succeeded because of everything he'd taken from her. Her phone rang. "Jackie, checking in. How are you holding up?" "I need your help," Kaitlyn said, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. "I want to reconnect with someone from my old firm." "You're going back to work. That's great." "Not exactly."
Kaitlyn stared at the picture of Richard before the Grand Plaza.
"I'm going to build something new." 2 days later, Kaitlyn sat across from her former mentor, Eleanor Vance, in a coffee shop. Despite not having seen each other in years, Eleanor had agreed to meet immediately. "I always wondered when you'd come to your senses," Eleanor said, after hearing Kaitlyn's story. "That man never deserved you." "I need to rebuild," Kaitlyn said. "Not just financially, everything." Eleanor studied her thoughtfully. The Kaitlyn I knew had a special talent for identifying undervalued properties, for seeing potential others missed. That Kaitlyn disappeared for a while, but she's coming back. Eleanor smiled. "I have some investors who might be interested in backing the right venture with the right leadership." As they discussed possibilities, Kaitlyn felt something she hadn't in years. Not just purpose, but hunger. Not just for revenge, but for reclamation of everything Richard had taken from her. 1 year, she promised herself, silently. 1 year to rebuild what he tried to destroy. The first step was the hardest, admitting to herself how much she'd given up for Richard, not just her career, but her friendships, her independence, her voice. Kaitlyn spent days reaching out to old colleagues and connections, swallowing her pride each time she had to explain her situation. Some doors remained closed, but others, ones she least expected, swung open. "I always knew that husband of yours was trouble," said James Henderson over lunch at his private club. The same Henderson whose deal Richard had been so concerned about the night of the Gala disaster. "Why did you work with him then?" Kaitlyn asked. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "Because you vouched for him. Your analysis of the market opportunities was what sold me. I assumed you were partners in the business, not just marriage." This revelation staggered Kaitlyn. Richard had always presented Henderson as his client, his relationship, but apparently the respected investor had been banking on Kaitlyn's expertise all along. "I'm starting something new," she told him carefully, "focused on commercial real estate with an emphasis on accessibility." Henderson nodded. "Send me your business plan when it's ready." He smiled. "And Kaitlyn, don't bring a husband to the pitch this time." With Eleanor's guidance, Kaitlyn developed Mitchell Accessibility Ventures, a company focused on acquiring and retrofitting commercial properties with state-of-the-art accessibility features while maintaining their luxury appeal. Her personal experience navigating spaces in a wheelchair gave her insights others missed. "Most accessibility modifications are functional but ugly," she explained to potential investors. "We're creating spaces that are both accessible and beautiful. Inclusion shouldn't mean sacrifice." The concept resonated, particularly with aging wealthy investors concerned about their own future mobility. Within 3 months, Kaitlyn had secured enough funding to make her first acquisition, a struggling boutique hotel that needed renovation. The work consumed her, leaving little time to dwell on Richard, but reminders were everywhere. Society pages showed him with a young model-turned-entrepreneur named Isabel Gray. Business journals praised his visionary leadership in rejuvenating the Grand Plaza. "He's taking credit for your hotel strategy," Martin told her during one of their regular meetings to monitor Richard's financial maneuvers. Their legal battle continued in the background, with Richard fighting every attempt to reclaim her rightful assets. "Let him," Kaitlyn said, reviewing the latest designs for her hotel renovation. "Success is the best revenge." But the wound still ached, especially on difficult days when her MS flared. On those days, she would wheel herself to the window of her new apartment, modest but accessible, paid for with her first investor checks, and look toward the Grand Plaza's distinctive silhouette against the skyline. 6 months after the Sidewalk incident, Kaitlyn's first project opened to rave reviews. Mitchell Accessibility Ventures redefines luxury for all. Read the headline in the business section. The article highlighted the innovative design elements that made the hotel fully accessible without sacrificing elegance. That same week, Richard filed new papers in their ongoing divorce, demanding she stop using her expertise, gained during their marriage, to compete with his businesses. "He's getting nervous," her attorney said. "This filing has no merit, but it shows you're getting under his skin." As summer turned to fall, Kaitlyn's company acquired 2 more properties. Her investor base grew, attracted by both the mission and the impressive returns on the first project. She hired a team that reflected her values, including several people with disabilities who brought valuable perspective to the designs. Then came the piece of information that changed everything. "The Westbury Group is looking to sell," Eleanor mentioned casually over dinner. "Financial troubles, too much debt, not enough modernization." Kaitlyn set down her fork. "Westbury owns the Grand Plaza." Eleanor nodded. "Among other properties, but the plaza is their crown jewel, and the one draining their resources with maintenance costs." That night, Kaitlyn couldn't sleep. The Grand Plaza wasn't just any building, it was the venue for Richard's annual charity gala, the cornerstone of his social standing. The event where he showcased himself as a philanthropist, while networking with the city's most powerful figures. With trembling hands, she pulled up the calendar on her phone. The gala was scheduled for March 15th, exactly 1 year after the night Richard had abandoned her. "It's too perfect," she whispered to the darkness. The acquisition wouldn't be easy. The plaza was worth significantly more than all her current properties combined. But if she could structure the right deal, bring in additional investors. Morning found her creating spreadsheets, running projections, developing a strategy. When she presented it to her board the following week, even Eleanor looked shocked. "It's ambitious," her mentor said. "The funding gap is substantial." "I can close it," Kaitlyn insisted. "This building isn't just an investment. It's a statement about who we are as a company." What she didn't say, it's also a statement about who I am now. With the board's conditional approval, Kaitlyn threw herself into securing additional funding. She approached Henderson, who was impressed with her returns. So far, she reached out to disability advocacy groups with investment arms. She leveraged every connection she'd rebuilt over the past months. Meanwhile, Richard's legal attacks continued. He froze the last joint account she had access to. He contested her right to alimony. His lawyers delayed and obstructed at every turn. During one particularly difficult deposition, his attorney asked pointedly about her health. "Given your condition, how can you claim to be capable of running a business? Aren't there days you can't even dress yourself?" The question was designed to humiliate. 2 years ago, it would have crushed her, but Kaitlyn merely smiled. "On those days I focus on strategy rather than execution. My disability hasn't diminished my mind, it's sharpened it. I see opportunities others miss precisely because I navigate the world differently now." The attorney looked unsettled. Later, she learned Richard had been watching from another room. 3 months of intense work followed.
Kaitlyn sacrificed sleep,
Pushed through pain, and leveraged every resource at her disposal. When the Westbury Group finally agreed to exclusive negotiations with Mitchell Accessibility Ventures, she allowed herself one moment of pure, unadulterated joy before diving into the complex process of closing the deal. She kept the acquisition quiet, using a holding company to mask her involvement. Real estate transactions of this size took time: inspections, financing approvals, contract negotiations. The closing date was set for February 28th, just 2 weeks before Richard's gala. Then came the call that threatened everything. "Richard Sanders is making a competing offer," Eleanor informed her, "substantially higher than ours." Kaitlyn gripped her phone tightly. How did he find out? Unknown, but he's moving aggressively. His team requested expedited due diligence. Due diligence. After the call, Kaitlyn wheeled onto her balcony, mind racing. If Richard acquired the plaza, her perfect moment of reckoning would vanish. Worse, he would likely discover her involvement and find a way to use it against her. That night, she made the hardest call of her life to James Henderson. "I need additional investment," quickly and quietly. She laid out the situation, without mentioning Richard directly. Henderson was silent for a long moment. "You're not telling me everything." "No," she admitted, "but I promise the investment is sound regardless of my personal motivations." "Double my initial stake," he said finally. "But, Kaitlyn, whatever you're planning, make it count." With Henderson's additional investment and an 11th-hour concession on terms, Westbury accepted Kaitlyn's revised offer. The day before closing, Richard's team made another attempt, offering an unusual pre-closing arrangement. "They want to secure rights to use the ballroom for an event in March, regardless of who ultimately owns the building," Eleanor explained. "Specifically March 15th. Kaitlyn smiled. "Tell them we'll accommodate that request. The current management can handle the booking as planned." On February 28th, Mitchell Accessibility Ventures officially acquired the Grand Plaza Hotel, per Kaitlyn's instructions. No announcements were made. The current staff remained in place, told only that the new ownership would be introduced after a brief transition period. Richard Sanders had no idea that the venue for his most important social event of the year now belonged to the woman he had discarded on a sidewalk. "What now?" Eleanor asked after the closing. Kaitlyn checked her calendar. "Now we prepare for a gala." The offices of Mitchell Accessibility Ventures hummed with energy. In the months since Kaitlyn had founded the company, they'd expanded from her initial one-room operation to a full floor in a downtown office building. The space was a showcase for their philosophy, elegantly accessible, with design features that served everyone regardless of ability. Kaitlyn rolled into the conference room where her executive team waited. On the screen was the architectural rendering of the Grand Plaza's planned renovation. "The ballroom is our priority," she explained, gesturing to the blueprints, "but we won't begin work until after March 15th. Her operations director frowned. "That's the Sanders Charity Gala. Shouldn't we postpone it while construction is underway?" "The gala will proceed as scheduled," Kaitlyn said firmly. "In fact, I'll be attending personally to assess the space during a major event." Her team exchanged glances. Though Kaitlyn had built a culture of openness, she rarely discussed her ex-husband or their ongoing divorce battle. Most knew the basics, that Richard Sanders had abandoned her after her MS diagnosis, but few understood the depth of his betrayal or her quiet determination to reclaim what was hers. After the meeting, Eleanor followed Kaitlyn to her office. "You haven't told them." Kaitlyn wheeled behind her desk. "Told them what?" "That this is personal, that you bought the plaza specifically because of Richard's gala." "It was a sound business decision," Kaitlyn countered. "The plaza's location and historic status make it a perfect flagship property for our company." Eleanor closed the door. "Kaitlyn, I've supported your vision from day one, but I'm concerned about what happens on the 15th. What exactly are you planning?" The question hung in the air. In truth, Kaitlyn had turned this moment over in her mind countless times, imagining different scenarios. The vindictive part of her wanted to cancel the gala entirely, to leave Richard scrambling. The businesswoman in her knew that would damage the plaza's reputation with other clients. The wounded ex-wife in her craved a dramatic confrontation. But none of those impulses reflected who she'd become. "I'm planning to attend a charity event at my property," she said finally. "Nothing more, nothing less." Eleanor didn't look convinced. "And when Richard sees you?" Kaitlyn smiled. "That's entirely up to him." As the gala approached, Kaitlyn maintained her focus on business. The company acquired 2 more properties. Their first hotel exceeded revenue projections for the 3rd straight quarter. A major magazine featured her in an article about entrepreneurs with disabilities changing the marketplace. But in private moments, doubts crept in. Was she being petty? Should she just move on? After one particularly difficult physical therapy session, when her body refused to cooperate and her pain levels spiked, she called Martin. "I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing," she confessed. "Maybe I should just sell the plaza, focus on healing." "Do you know what Richard did yesterday?" Martin asked instead of answering directly. "He filed another motion to reduce your settlement, claiming your business success means you don't need support. Meanwhile, his lawyers are still fighting to keep your initial investment in his company." Her resolve hardened. "Thank you for the reminder." 2 weeks before the gala, Kaitlyn visited the plaza incognito. Introduced only as the consultant for the new owners, she wheeled through the grand lobby, noting accessibility issues to address in the renovation. The manager, unaware of her true identity, guided her through the service areas, the shops, and finally the ballroom, where workers were already beginning early preparations for the gala. "Mr. Sanders is very particular about the arrangements," the manager explained. "He personally approves every detail." Kaitlyn nodded, throat tight as she surveyed the space where Richard would soon hold court, unaware that he stood on her property. "The new owners have approved all his requests?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, though we've had trouble reaching Mr. Sanders directly to confirm some final details. His assistant says he's traveling." Later that day, curious, Kaitlyn had Eleanor make discreet inquiries. The intelligence came back quickly. Richard had taken his new girlfriend, Isabel, to Paris. Rumors suggested an engagement. The news shouldn't have hurt. Their marriage was long over, but the thought of Richard moving on so completely, building a new life while still fighting to deny her what was rightfully hers, stoked a fire in Kaitlyn's chest. That evening she visited the dress designer who had been working on her gown for the gala. "I've changed my mind," she told him. "Chilled, not black, or red, or the brightest, boldest red you can create." The week before the gala brought final preparations. Kaitlyn reviewed the guest list, obtained from the hotel management, a who's who of the city's elite. She recognized many names, people who had dined in her home, who had benefited from her hospitality and connections, who had disappeared from her life after Richard discarded her. Among them was James Henderson, who had been informed of her ownership of the plaza and had promised his discretion. "Some lessons need to be taught publicly," he'd said, when she explained her plan. 3 days before the event, Kaitlyn faced a moment of truth when her MS flared badly, her legs refused to cooperate entirely, and fatigue dragged at her like an anchor. Her doctor reminded her that stress was a trigger. "Perhaps you should reconsider this event," he suggested. "Your health needs to be the priority." For a moment, Kaitlyn wavered. Was she risking her well-being for revenge? The old Kaitlyn might have backed down, put others' needs before her own. But as she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, she realized this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation, taking back not just what Richard had stolen from her financially, but what he'd taken from her spirit, her confidence, her belief in herself. "This isn't about him," she whispered to the darkness. "It's about me." The next morning, she called the plaza's manager. "I'll be attending the gala as the representative of the new ownership," she informed him. "Please arrange for the accessible entrance to be cleared and ready, and I'll need a moment with the staff beforehand." The night before the gala, Kaitlyn sat at her vanity, studying her reflection. The woman who looked back at her was not the same one who had sat weeping on a sidewalk a year ago. Her hair was styled differently, shorter, more confident. Her face had lost the softness of someone who existed to please others. Her eyes held a clarity and purpose that had been missing for years. The red dress hung on her closet door, a battle flag waiting to be unfurled. "One final detail," she murmured, opening her jewelry box. Inside lay the diamond earrings Richard had given her on their last anniversary. She'd kept them through the divorce proceedings, one of the few pieces his lawyers hadn't contested. She held them up, watching them catch the light, then deliberately placed them back in the box. For tomorrow she would wear the simple pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's, a reminder of who she was before Richard and who she had become after him. As she prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a text from Eleanor. "Everything is in place. Are you ready?" Kaitlyn typed back a simple response. "I've been ready for a year." The morning of the gala arrived with unexpected complications. Richard's assistant called the plaza in a panic. There were issues with the seating chart. The menu needed last-minute adjustments, and Mr. Sanders insisted on meeting the new ownership representative before the event. Mr. Sanders was quite adamant, the manager told Kaitlyn over the phone. "He says there are details about the venue's future that could affect tonight's proceedings." "Tell him the new owner's representative will be at the gala," Kaitlyn replied calmly. "Any discussions can happen then." Hanging up, she couldn't help but smile at Richard's predictable need to control every situation, always demanding immediate access, always expecting the world to bend to his schedule. As Kaitlyn dressed for the day, her phone buzzed with a news alert. She froze when she saw the headline: "Sanders announces engagement to fashion entrepreneur Isabel Gray." The accompanying photo showed Richard and his new fiancée leaving an exclusive restaurant, her hand extended to display an enormous diamond ring. The article mentioned the couple would make their first appearance at tonight's charity gala. A year ago, this news would have devastated her. Today, it barely registered as surprise. Of course, Richard had timed the announcement to dominate conversation at his event. Of course, he had replaced her with someone younger, someone who projected the image he craved. What did surprise her was the follow-up call from Martin. "You need to see this," he said, forwarding a legal document. "Richard's lawyers just filed it this morning." Kaitlyn scanned the motion with growing disbelief. Richard was claiming that her company's acquisition of properties represented marital business strategy developed during their marriage. He was seeking ownership interest in Mitchell Accessibility Ventures. "Can he do this?" she asked. "It's a desperate move," Martin assured her, "but it shows he's tracking your success and wants to cash in." After the call, Kaitlyn sat in stunned silence. The audacity was breathtaking. First, he'd abandoned her when she became inconvenient. Then he'd fought to deny her fair compensation for her contributions to his success. Now, he wanted to claim a piece of what she'd built entirely on her own. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was tonight's plan petty compared to the legal battles ahead? Should she focus on fighting him in court rather than creating a scene at his gala? Her phone rang again. Eleanor, this time. "Have you seen the news and the legal filing?" "Yes to both." Kaitlyn sighed. "I'm reconsidering tonight. Maybe this is all beneath me." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something I've never shared before? I knew Richard in business circles before you married him. He approached my firm for investment. I turned him down because my due diligence revealed a pattern. He used people, discarded them, then rewrote the narrative to make himself the hero." Kaitlyn's grip tightened on the phone. "Why didn't you tell me this before I married him?" "You were in love. Would you have believed me?" Eleanor's voice softened. "But that's not why I'm telling you now. I'm telling you because men like Richard Sanders don't just want success. They need to win at others' expense. This legal maneuver proves it. Yes, Tulen is sign. He can't stand that you've succeeded without him." The realization settled over Kaitlyn like a mantle. "He wants to write me out of my own story. Again." "Exactly. So the question isn't whether tonight is beneath you. It's whether you'll allow him to keep controlling the narrative." After hanging up, Kaitlyn rolled to her window and looked out at the city. In the distance, she could see the distinctive silhouette of the Grand Plaza, her property, her achievement. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hanian Mitchell. This is Isabel Gray. I'd like to meet before tonight's event, privately." Kaitlyn stared at the message from Richard's fiancée. What could she possibly want? Was this a trap? Or did the woman truly not know who owned the plaza now? Before she could decide how to respond, another message appeared from the same number. "I found something in Richard's papers you should see. Please." The urgency in those simple words triggered Kaitlyn's instincts. Something wasn't right. "Plaza Lobby Bar, 3 p.m., she texted back. Whatever Isabel wanted to show her, it would need to be significant to change Kaitlyn's plans for tonight. But as she resumed preparations, a knot of uncertainty formed in her stomach. The carefully choreographed evening she'd imagined for months suddenly felt unpredictable. And Richard Sanders had always been dangerous when cornered. The plaza's lobby bar was nearly empty at 3 o'clock. Kaitlyn positioned her wheelchair at a corner table with a view of all entrances, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. Meeting Richard's fiancée hadn't been part of her plan. Isabel Gray arrived precisely on time, her willowy frame draped in casual luxury, designer jeans, silk blouse, minimal but expensive jewelry, younger than Kaitlyn by perhaps 5 years, with the kind of effortless beauty that came from good genes and better skincare. But her eyes were red-rimmed, her perfectly manicured hands trembling slightly. "Thank you for meeting me," Isabel said, sliding into the chair opposite Kaitlyn. "I wasn't sure you would. I admit I'm curious why Richard's fiancé wants to speak with his ex-wife hours before your debut as a couple." Isabel flinched. "So you've seen the announcement." She twisted the enormous diamond on her finger. "Did you know that Richard proposed in Paris 2 days ago, but made me wait to wear the ring until today? He wanted the photos timed for maximum publicity before the gala." "That sounds like Richard," Kaitlyn said, neutrally. "Everything orchestrated for optimal appearance." Isabel reached for her handbag, a designer piece that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I found these when I was looking for a passport in his home office. He keeps a locked drawer." But she shrugged delicately. I have certain skills from my modeling days. She slid a folder across the table. Kaitlyn opened it to find financial documents, bank statements, transfer records, investment reports, all bearing her name alongside Richard's, documents that her lawyers had been requesting for months that Richard claimed didn't exist. Why are you showing me these? Kaitlyn asked, her mind already calculating how valuable these would be in her divorce proceedings. Isabel's perfect composure cracked, because yesterday I heard him on the phone with his lawyer. He was laughing about how he'd handled you, how he'd timed his departure perfectly after moving assets, but before your medical costs became a burden. She nearly spat the last word. Then he mentioned that some wheelchair-bound bitch was buying up properties and he needed to shut it down. Kaitlyn kept her expression neutral, though anger burned through her veins. And this concerns you because I have a sister with cerebral palsy. Isabel's voice broke. She uses a wheelchair. Richard doesn't know. I never told him. Because she looked away. Because I was stupid, dazzled by the lifestyle, the connections for my business. I convinced myself he was the perfect partner. I made the same mistake, Kaitlyn said quietly. Isabel met her eyes. There's more. He knows you bought this building. He's planning something for tonight. Kaitlyn's blood ran cold. What exactly? I don't know details. Just that he mentioned making sure you regret ever crossing him. His lawyers filed some motion this morning, claiming my business was developed using strategy from our marriage, Kaitlyn confirmed. Isabel nodded. He's planning to announce it tonight. It's to humiliate you if you show up, or claim you were too afraid to face him if you don't. For a moment, Kaitlyn sat in stunned silence. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. He still doesn't understand who he's dealing with. He still doesn't understand who he's dealing with. Isabel looked confused. What do you mean? Richard always underestimated me. First as his wife, now as his adversary. Kaitlyn closed the folder, her decision crystallizing. Thank you for these documents. They'll be extremely helpful. What will you do tonight? Kaitlyn smiled. Exactly what I planned to do all along. Attend a charity event at my property. Isabel's eyes widened. You knew he would find out. I counted on it. Kaitlyn wheeled back slightly from the table. The question is, what will you do tonight? The younger woman touched her engagement ring, twisting it. I don't know. Until yesterday, I believed we had a future. Richard is very good at creating beautiful illusions, Kaitlyn said. Pause. But eventually, the real man emerges, the man who abandons people when they become inconvenient. As Isabel left, visibly shaken, Kaitlyn remained at the table, reviewing the documents. They were exactly what her lawyers needed, proof of Richard's financial deception, evidence that could turn their divorce proceedings in her favor. But tonight wasn't about legal victories. It was about something more fundamental, about standing proudly in the spaces Richard had tried to deny her, about refusing to disappear from the story of her own life. She texted Eleanor, change of plans. We move forward, but differently. Meet me at my apartment. It's time for the final preparations. The night air carried a hint of early spring. As Kaitlyn's car pulled up to the Grand Plaza Hotel, from inside, she could see the red carpet stretching from the street to the grand entrance, lined with photographers capturing the arrival of the city's elite. Searchlights swept the sky, and a massive banner proclaimed 5th Annual Sanders Foundation Gala across the historic facade. Her facade, her building, her moment. Are you ready, Miss Mitchell? Her driver asked, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. Kaitlyn took a deep breath. I've been ready for a year. The accessible entrance was at the side of the building, less glamorous than the main steps, but offering a direct path to the lobby. As instructed, the hotel staff had cleared it completely, with security ensuring no photographers waited there. Kaitlyn had been specific. Her entrance would happen on her terms, not sneaking in a back way. As her driver set up her wheelchair, Kaitlyn adjusted her dress, a custom creation in vibrant red, designed to flow elegantly whether she was standing or seated. Her hair was swept up, revealing the simple pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's. No diamonds tonight. Nothing from her life with Richard. Miss Mitchell, the plaza manager, greeted her, visibly nervous. Earlier, she had informed the staff of her true identity as the new owner. Everything is prepared according to your instructions. Thank you, Thomas. Is Mr. Sanders already inside? Yes, ma'am. He and his fiancée arrived 20 minutes ago. They're greeting guests in the main lobby before the ballroom opens. Perfect. Exactly where she wanted him to be. The manager escorted her through the service corridor that connected to the main lobby. At the doorway, Kaitlyn paused, observing the scene. The soaring space glittered with chandeliers, filled with beautiful people in expensive clothes. Champagne flowed freely as conversations hummed at precisely the right decibel for sophisticated revelry. And there was Richard, commanding the center of the room in a white dinner jacket, Isabel at his side, looking exquisite but somehow diminished. Her engagement ring caught the light as she clutched a champagne flute too tightly. Eleanor appeared at Kaitlyn's side. Last chance to rethink this. No need. Kaitlyn straightened her shoulders. Signal James. Across the lobby, James Henderson caught Eleanor's subtle nod. The influential investor immediately moved toward Richard, engaging him in conversation, positioning him to face away from the main entrance. Cue the announcement, Kaitlyn instructed the manager. The subtle chimes that signaled announcements at plaza events rang through the lobby. Conversations paused as the manager stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, Mitchell Accessibility Ventures welcomes you to the Grand Plaza Hotel. It is our pleasure to introduce the new owner of this historic property, Miss Kaitlyn Mitchell. Richard's head snapped up, confusion crossing his features as he processed the name. The room went silent as Kaitlyn wheeled into the lobby, the crowd instinctively parting before her. The red dress made her impossible to miss, a flame moving through the sea of black and white formal wear. She kept her eyes forward, not acknowledging Richard yet, smiling and nodding to other guests as she made her way to the center of the lobby. Some recognized her immediately, former friends, business associates, people who had known her as Mrs. Sanders. Their shocked expressions told her everything. When she reached the center of the room, she finally turned to face Richard directly.
He stood frozen.
Champagne glass suspended halfway to his lips, his face cycling through emotions, confusion, recognition, shock, and finally, fury. Good evening, everyone. Kaitlyn addressed the crowd, her voice clear and confident. I'm delighted to welcome you to the first event at the plaza under new ownership. The Sanders Foundation does important work, and we're proud to host this celebration of philanthropy. Murmurs spread through the crowd as people connected the dots. Richard Sanders' ex-wife now owned the venue for his most important social event. The ex-wife he had abandoned after her MS diagnosis. The woman everyone had expected to disappear into quiet obscurity. Richard moved toward her, his face a mask of controlled rage. "What is this?" he hissed low enough that only those nearest could hear. "This is business, Richard." Kaitlyn smiled pleasantly. Mitchell Accessibility Ventures acquired the plaza last month. We're continuing all existing event contracts, including tonight's gala. Mitchell, his eyes narrowed. You're using your maiden name. I've reclaimed many things this past year. Before he could respond, James Henderson approached, clapping a hand on Richard's shoulder. Kaitlyn, the renovation plans for this place are brilliant. Oh, Richard, did you know your ex-wife has become one of the most innovative developers in the city? Her last project delivered a 22% return to investors. Richard's jaw tightened. Across the room, Kaitlyn noticed Isabel watching intently, twisting her engagement ring. "If you'll excuse me," Kaitlyn said smoothly, "I should greet the other guests. This is, after all, my building." As she moved through the crowd, she felt Richard's glare boring into her back, but something had shifted. For the first time since her diagnosis, she felt no fear of him, no need for his approval, no desire for his acknowledgement. The whispers followed her, guests piecing together the story, updating each other on the dramatic turn of events. Several who had ignored her after the divorce now approached with effusive greetings, as if they'd never abandoned her. Kaitlyn accepted their hollow welcome with gracious detachment. "You're the talk of the room," Eleanor murmured, appearing at her side with a glass of water. "That was never the goal," Kaitlyn replied, "but I won't pretend it isn't satisfying." The doors to the ballroom opened, and guests began moving toward the gala's main event. Kaitlyn positioned herself near the entrance, accepting congratulations from those who now saw her as a successful businesswoman rather than an object of pity. She was speaking with a potential investor when Richard approached again, his composure clearly hanging by a thread. "We need to talk," he said, was not bothering with pleasantries. "Privately. Anything you have to say can wait until tomorrow, Richard. Tonight is about charity. Remember." She gestured to the ballroom. "Your guests are waiting." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You think you've won something here. This petty stunt won't change the fact that I left you, that I moved on to someone better, someone whole." The words were designed to wound, to remind her of that night on the sidewalk. A year ago, they would have shattered her. Tonight, they revealed only his desperation. "Yes, you left me," she agreed calmly. "It was the best gift you ever gave me. It forced me to remember who I was before you, and discover who I could become after you." Before he could respond, a commotion near the ballroom entrance caught their attention. Isabel was standing there, her engagement ring held in her outstretched palm. "I can't do this," she announced, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I won't become the next woman you discard when she becomes inconvenient." Richard's face drained of color. "Isabel, don't make a scene. That's all you care about, isn't it? How things look, not how they are." She placed the ring in his hand, closing his fingers around it. "I called my sister tonight, told her everything about you. She said something that made everything clear. If he'll do it to someone else, he'll do it to you." With that, she turned and walked out, head high, leaving Richard clutching the diamond and facing a room full of curious onlookers. The moment hung suspended. Richard Sanders, who had orchestrated his life for maximum advantage and appearance, caught in a public unraveling he couldn't control. His gaze returned to Kaitlyn, naked hatred in his eyes. "You did this," he accused. "You turned her against me." "No, Richard, you did that yourself." Kaitlyn squared her shoulders. "Just like you taught me who you really were when you left me on that sidewalk." She signaled to the manager, who stepped forward. "Mr. Sanders, it's time for your opening remarks. The guests are seated." For a moment, Richard seemed unable to move, trapped between his public obligations and private fury. Then, with visible effort, he straightened his jacket and forced his features into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't over," he said to Kaitlyn, tucking the rejected engagement ring into his pocket. "Actually, Richard, it is." She gestured to the ballroom doors. "After you." The owner of the plaza traditionally follows the guest of honor. As Richard walked stiffly into the ballroom to address his guests, Kaitlyn remained in the lobby for a moment, allowing herself to absorb what had just happened. Not just the public reckoning, but the internal one, the final release of the woman she had been with Richard Sanders. Then she wheeled forward, entering the ballroom as the whispers continued, head high, moving not as an ex-wife seeking revenge, but as a woman who had reclaimed her power, her purpose, and her place in the world. The morning after the gala, Kaitlyn woke to her phone buzzing incessantly. News of the previous night's drama had spread through social and business circles like wildfire. The story of how Richard Sanders' discarded wife had become his landlord, how his fiancée had returned his ring in front of half the city's elite, was too delicious for the gossip columns to ignore. "The plaza's new owner makes dramatic debut at ex-husband's event," read one headline. "Sanders Foundation Gala, upstaged by property acquisition and broken engagement," declared another. Kaitlyn silenced her phone and wheeled to the window of her apartment. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the city. the Grand Plaza visible in the distance, she felt strangely empty. Not the triumphant elation she had imagined, nor the bitterness she had carried for months. Just peace, as if a fever had finally broken. The remainder of the gala had proceeded with tense, artificial normality. Richard had delivered his planned speech with mechanical precision, never acknowledging the dramatic events that had preceded it, or Kaitlyn's presence in the room. She had stayed until the end, accepting congratulations on her business success, laying groundwork for future investments. When she finally left, Richard had already disappeared, slipping away while the band played, avoiding any chance of further confrontation. Her doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Eleanor stood outside, holding a newspaper and coffee. "You made the business section too," her mentor said, spreading the paper on Kaitlyn's dining table. The headline read, "Mitchell Accessibility Ventures acquires historic Grand Plaza, announces major accessibility renovation." At least someone focused on the actual business story, Kaitlyn mused, accepting the coffee gratefully. "How does it feel, the morning after?" Kaitlyn considered the question. "Different than I expected. Less about him, more about me." She gestured to the newspaper. "This is what matters. The business we're building, the spaces we're transforming." Eleanor studied her thoughtfully. "You know, when you first came to me with this idea, I worried it was just about revenge." "It started that way," Kaitlyn admitted. "But somewhere along the line, it became something else, something bigger." Her phone buzzed again. Martin this time. She put him on speaker. "Richard's lawyers called this morning," he announced without preamble. "They want to settle all claims immediately with a non-disclosure agreement." Kaitlyn exchanged a look with Eleanor. Or what prompted this sudden desire to resolve things? Apparently, several major investors contacted Richard after last night, expressing concerns about the lawsuit he filed against you. They suggested it reflected poorly on his judgment to attack a successful businesswoman with a disability, particularly one focused on accessibility initiatives. "All 7 to dentis, with advantages and palm," Martin sounded pleased. "Also, those documents you provided are quite damning. His lawyers know it." After she ended the call, Kaitlyn sat quietly, absorbing the news. The fight that had consumed her for a year was ending not with a dramatic courtroom showdown, but with a quiet capitulation. "Will you accept the settlement?" Eleanor asked. "Will you accept the settlement?" Eleanor asked. "Yes, it's time to close that chapter completely." Later that morning, Kaitlyn visited the plaza, her first official tour as owner. The staff welcomed her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. She inspected areas that would need modification to improve accessibility, made notes about preserving historic features while modernizing others. In the ballroom, now empty of last night's glamour, she paused. Right. This was where Richard had stood, where his carefully constructed narrative had begun to unravel. Thomas, the manager, approached hesitantly.
"Hey, Miss Mitchell."
"There's something you should know. Mr. Sanders has cancelled his reservation for next year's gala." Kaitlyn nodded. "I expected as much. The thing is, we've already received 3 inquiries from other organizations interested in the date, including the National MS Society." She looked up, surprised. "EMS Society?" "Yes, ma'am. They specifically mentioned your acquisition, inspired them to reach out. They're hoping to make it an annual event, celebrating accessibility and inclusion." Something warm unfurled in Kaitlyn's chest. Not the sharp satisfaction of revenge, but the deeper pleasure of meaningful change. 6 months later, Kaitlyn stood, using forearm crutches on one of her better days, at the edge of the plaza's newly installed accessible entrance. No side door, no separate ramp. The main entrance had been completely redesigned with a gradual, elegant incline that served everyone. "It's perfect," Eleanor said, standing beside her. "Not yet," Kaitlyn replied, "but it's getting there." The past months had brought changes beyond the plaza. Mitchell Accessibility Ventures had acquired 2 more properties. Major developers were consulting with them on inclusive design.
And most
Surprisingly, Isabel Gray had reached out, proposing a collaboration on a line of adaptive fashion. Richard had disappeared from Kaitlyn's life as completely as he'd once tried to make her disappear from his. The settlement had been finalized, the non-disclosure agreement signed. Occasionally she heard rumors that he'd moved to another city, that his business was struggling without the connections she'd brought. But those stories belonged to someone else's life. Now, her assistant approached with a message. The MS Society committee had arrived for their walkthrough of the ballroom. Their gala was scheduled for exactly 1 year after Richard's last event. As Kaitlyn moved forward to greet them, she caught her reflection in the plaza's gleaming brass doors. The woman who looked back wasn't defined by who had left her or what had been taken. She was defined by what she had built in the aftermath. Not just a business empire, but a new sense of self. One that would never again be abandoned on any sidewalk by anyone. That's the end of the story. If you were in Kaitlyn's position, would you have confronted Richard differently at the gala? Let me know in the comments below. If you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. Go ahead and enjoy our next story.